First of all, I'd like to thank the Middle East Studies Program Assistant, Camelia Shufani, for her hard work and help with the logistics of this event. The Director of Middle East Studies Program, Lori Brand, who's not with us right now, for her constant support. And I would like to thank our panelists here for accepting the invitation in such short notice and honoring us with their presence. Before we get started, I would like to announce two exciting events that are coming up that may be of interest to some of you. Professor Najmedin Meshkati, who's standing behind right there, he's going to give a very interesting talk about Persian language, culture, and history, its structure, and its transformation. And it will take place tomorrow at 5 o'clock at GFS 3:30. Sandwiches and snacks will be served, which is also always nice to have when you have a talk that late in the day. Another event that is going to draw a lot of excitement is the conference that the Middle East Studies Program, in conjunction with Farhang Foundation, have organized. It is called Iranian Culture and Diaspora. The conference will be held on campus on April 10th. More information about these events can be found in Middle East Studies webpage. So on to our topic at hand. With all the news coverage on Iran's nuclear negotiations with the 5+1 countries, everyone is thinking about the prospect of some kind of resolution to almost a decade of negotiations, high tensions, and economic sanctions. This is a very timely event, for another round of high-level negotiations are scheduled this Sunday, March 15th, in Lausanne, Switzerland. Our aim today is to have a candid discussion about the history of Iran's road to gain mastery of nuclear technology and some of the issues that is connected to it, such as Iran's energy needs, right to have access to peaceful nuclear technology, and regional security and safety issues. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce our panelists today. Dr. Sahimi, who's sitting over there, is a professor of chemical engineering and material science at USC School of Engineering. He has written extensively about Iran for Los Angeles Times, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Harvard International Reviews, and a host of other publications. Dr. Meshkati, sitting right here, is a professor of civil and environmental engineering and international relations, also at USC's School of Engineering. He was a Jefferson Science Fellow and Science and Technology Advisor to the Secretary of State, U.S. State Department in 2009 and 2010. Dr. Meshkati has inspected many nuclear power plants around the world, including Chernobyl in 1997, Fukushima, Daiichi, and Diani in 2012. He has recently been selected by the U.S. National Academy of Science and served as a technical advisor on a national panel investigating the Fukushima accident. It is a pleasure to have you both with us today. So without further ado, I hand over this to Professor Sahimi, who is going to give us a detailed historical background on the nuclear negotiations, and then we'll take a brief pause to take questions. This is it's supposed to be an interactive discussion, so please feel free to raise questions while our esteemed speakers are talking about some of the issues. And then after that, Professor Meshkati will give us an insight into the regional security and safety concerns. So please help me welcome our esteemed guests.
Should I start? Well, let me say hello to everybody. I'm happy to be here, and I would like to thank the organizers to include me to this event. We all hear about nuclear negotiations between Iran and 5+1. Benjamin Netanyahu's speech of last week in the joint session of Congress, the letter by 47 Republican senators to Iranian leaders the other day, the reaction by the Obama administration, and so on. So it would be nice to have a sort of a background to what gave rise to the present situation. Iran's nuclear program actually started in 1950s. After the United States develop nuclear bomb and use it in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And let me remind you that the U.S. remains the only country that has ever used atomic bomb against any other nation. The Eisenhower administration developed a program called Atoms for Peace, whereby the administration would help other nations to use peaceful use of nuclear technology in return for promising not to pursue a nuclear weapon. So according to that, Iran and the U.S. signed an agreement in 1957 for cooperation regarding nuclear technology. That started basically what turned out later on developed into Iran's nuclear program. In 1967, Iran received its first nuclear reactor, which was a small 10 megawatt nuclear reactor, basically donated by the United States. The U.S. also supplied its fuel so that the reactor could run for many years. Then in 1970s, the Ford administration encouraged Iran to develop nuclear technology and nuclear infrastructure and use nuclear reactors to generate electricity. And it wasn't just encouragement. There are two documents in the presidential library of Gerald Ford administration that I pulled out several years ago, back in 2004, that shows that in the discussion in National Security Council of the United States, they discussed that they would propose to Iran that the United States would give Iran technology for two purposes: reprocessing of spent fuel and also enriching uranium on Iran's soil, and not only just for Iran, but for the whole region, because at that time Pakistan, for example, was talking to France about getting the nuclear technology, and the Ford administration thought that this was a big market and they didn't want to lose it. So there were two documents signed by Brent Scowcroft, a national security advisor to President Gerald Ford, and another one signed by Henry Kissinger, who was Secretary of State at that time, where they outlined what U.S. would give to Iran and what Iran would do in return. They agreed to do that in return for Iran signing an agreement to give contracts to American companies to build up to 8 nuclear reactors. The Shah of Iran at that time also talked about replacing oil as a fuel with nuclear reactors, saying that oil is too valuable to be burned as fuel. He said famously that we could use oil to make proteins, we could make oil to make petrochemical products, and so on. So then Iran signed an agreement not with American companies, but with the German company Siemens, to build 2 nuclear reactors, 1,000 megawatt reactor in Bushehr. When the Iranian Revolution came in 1978, early 1979, one reactor was 80% complete, one reactor was about 50% complete. But because of the revolution, the work on the reactors stopped. When the revolutionary government took over in February of 1979, they decided that Iran does not need nuclear reactor. Okay, and here was the first victim of this cancellation of Iran nuclear reactor, and that was me. Okay, I came to the United States in 1978 on a scholarship by Atomic Energy Organization to study chemical engineering with emphasis on nuclear reactors, so that I would go back and work for Atomic Energy Organization of Iran. And in fact, the first year that I was there, I took a lot of courses related to nuclear reactors. But the revolution came in fall of 1978. I never received any scholarship. So when after the revolution I went to Iran and demanded my scholarship, they said, well, we have canceled the program. We don't owe you anything. You don't owe us anything. But since you were nice and came to Tehran, we pay for your airfare, okay? So that was the extent of my scholarship from Atomic Energy Organization. But things changed. The next year, in 1980, Iraq attacked Iran, and I must remind you that Iraq attacked Iran with the encouragement of the United States. And then in 1981, at the height of the initial phase of the war, Iraq started threatening Iran with using weapons that, the way they put it, that Iranian leader would not even dream of. Then in June 1981, Israeli fighters attacked Iraq nuclear reactor under construction in Osirak near Baghdad and destroyed it. That alarmed Iranian leaders because, first of all, Iran was under embargo by Western countries to get any weapon. And secondly, everybody knew that although the Western countries had professed their neutrality towards the war, but they had actually tilted towards Iraq and were supplying Iraq with all sorts of aid. So that alarmed Iranian leaders. So what they decided to do was to restart the nuclear program. This happened in 1983. And here is a crucial point about Iran's nuclear program. We read often that Iran did this secretly and Iran went underground and Iran did this illegally. But that wasn't the case. Because when Iranian leaders decided to restart the nuclear program, they had no intention of doing it underground or secretly. They approached International Atomic Energy Agency in 1983, saying that they want to set up the infrastructure for Iran's nuclear program, and asked the agency to send a delegation to Iran to investigate Iran's need and Iran's possibility to set up an enrichment program on Iran's soil. The team visited in October of 1983. They submitted an extensive report to IAEA, which is, by the way, it exists in the archives of the IAEA. And then in 1985, it was brought to the Board of Governors of the IAEA to be put on a vote. But the United States actually stopped it. And in fact, one of the U.S. officials at that time was quoted as saying that we killed the program right there. So Iran realized that the United States will prevent it from getting the nuclear technology through the IAEA. So they searched for other countries. They approached Argentina, they approached Czechoslovakia, they approached Italy, and they approached other countries. Every time they reached an agreement with any of these countries, the U.S. stopped it. So by 1989, Iranian leaders recognized that if they are going to set up a nuclear infrastructure for Iran, at least in the initial phase, it has to be underground. Okay, so they went underground, not because they wanted it, but because they were forced into it. Now, here's another crucial point. Going underground wasn't a violation of Iran's obligation at that time towards International Atomic Energy Agency, and in particular towards Iran's safeguard agreements with the IAEA. Because the safeguard agreements that was in force, and is still in force today, stipulated that if any member state wanted to set up a nuclear infrastructure on its soil, its only obligation towards the agency was to notify the agency no later than 180 days prior to introducing nuclear material into the infrastructure. In other words, Iran could build all sorts of nuclear infrastructure in secret, but as long as they didn't introduce any nuclear material into the infrastructure, and as long as they informed the agency no later than 180 days before introducing the nuclear material, they were not in violation of their obligations. So the work went on for years. And of course, Iran used the expertise of Abdul Qadir Khan of Pakistan, who is considered the father of Pakistan nuclear program. And in 1995, also, Iran signed an agreement with Russia to complete at least one of the reactors in Bushehr that Siemens had left and had not completed. Now, here is another crucial point. When they signed the agreement with Russia in 1995, and the Bushehr reactor is a totally civilian reactor, both the United States and Israel objected to it, even though it is a civilian reactor, and according to the agreement that Iran had signed with Russia, the spent fuel of the reactor, which contains plutonium, which if separated can be used for bomb making, would be shipped to Russia. So there was no way that that reactor could be used in any way to make nuclear weapon. But they objected to it because the objection was that Iranian scientists will learn the nuclear technology and later on use the knowledge for a nuclear weapon program, which in my opinion was total nonsense. But anyway, so in August of 2002, an opposition group called Mujahideen Khalq announced that they have information about secret nuclear facilities in Iran. Now, who gave them? It was Israel. It is widely believed that it was Israel that gave the Mujahideen Khalq the information regarding the secret facility. In fact, an article that was published in the New Yorker in 2006, and the conversation that I have had myself with several people indicated that Israel originally approached other Iranian opposition groups to reveal the information because they didn't want to reveal it themselves, but other opposition group didn't accept it, and Mujahideen Khalq, that has a long history of collaborating with Iran's enemy, including, for example, Saddam Hussein during Iran-Iraq war, accepted to do that. So that was revelation. IAEA sent a team to Iran in the fall of 2002, and then in February of 2003, Iranian president at that time, Mohammad Khatami, formally announced the existence of the nuclear facilities in Iran and invited IAEA to visit Iran and formally look at all the programs. So that basically started the dispute that we are still grappling with after 12 years. Now remember, February of 2003 was only a month before U.S. invasion of Iraq. So United States invaded Iraq on March 19, 2003, just 5 weeks after announcement by President Khatami. All right. Right after the invasion, and because the U.S. Apparently toppled Saddam Hussein very easily, and the slogans, from what I know and reported in the press, in the U.S. military and among right-wing politicians in the United States was that everybody goes to Baghdad, but real men go to Tehran. The talk was that after Baghdad, they would invade Iran. So in May of 2003, the Khatami administration submitted a comprehensive plan to the Bush administration, according to which, and all the documents are in the New York Times archive. You can look at it. You can go to Nicholas Kristof's blog at New York Times, and you can look at it. According to that plan, Iran had agreed to first put its nuclear program under a strict inspection and control by International Atomic Energy Agency. Secondly, Iran would agree to sign the additional protocol. Now, what is additional protocol? Additional protocol was basically devised after the IAEA discovered, after the first war with Iraq in 1991, that Iraq was very close to making a nuclear bomb. And they thought that the reason for it was that loophole in the safeguard agreements that I mentioned. Namely, a nation does not have any obligation to report any nuclear activity as long as it reports the existence of those activities no later than 180 days prior to introduction of nuclear material into those facilities. So they devised a sort of additional guideline, which is called additional protocol, whereby if a nation, a state, a member of IAEA, the day they decide to do something, they have to report the decision to the IAEA. So Iran had agreed to sign the additional protocol. An additional protocol would also give the IAEA the extra intrusive inspection authority, namely IAEA could go into Iran on short notice, I think it's 48 hours, to inspect any facility, whether it has been declared as nuclear or not, to see whether there is any suspicious activity going on or not. And Iran had also suggested that it would convert Hezbollah in Lebanon to a purely political organization. Iran had also agreed that it would go along with any agreement that Palestinians would reach with Israel regarding the Palestinian problems. So Iran basically put what they call the grand bargain on the table. But the Bush administration, and this was just a few days, the day that it was submitted, it was a few days after President Bush on that made that famous declaration that mission accomplished. The mission of invading and occupying Iraq had been accomplished in 2 months. So they thought they would go to Iran next, and they would also take Tehran so easily. So they rejected it. After that, in summer of 2003, Iran and 3 European countries, namely Britain, France, and Germany, began negotiating with Iran on behalf of the George W. Bush administration. So there were 2 agreements. One is called the Saadabad Declaration in October of 2003, and one is called the Paris Agreement in November of 2004. According to the declaration and agreement, Iran froze its nuclear program completely. Iran started implementing the additional protocol on a volunteer basis until such time as the Iranian parliament ratifies it. And Iran also agreed to other concessions in return for receiving from the European Union two things. First, security guarantees that Iran will not be attacked, and second, expanded commercial relationship. So Iran did carry out its obligation. At the same time, Iran made a comprehensive proposal to address the problem of Iran's nuclear program. Iran's chief nuclear negotiator at that time was a cleric called Hassan Rouhani. Hassan Rouhani is now Iranian president. And Iran's chief diplomat at that time was a guy named Mohammad Javad Zarif, who was at that time Iran's ambassador to the United Nations and is now foreign minister. The two of them, together with the administration of Khatami, made a comprehensive suggestions to the European Union. They suggested that they would limit Iran's number of centrifuges that would spin to enrich uranium to only 3,000. This was a time that Iran had only one cascade of 164 centrifuges that they were not even working. They had been just installed. But the European Union rejected that also. In August of 2005, the European Union came back supposedly with its counter-proposal to Iran's concession, but a European diplomat put it in 2007 after the negotiations failed. He said that what we suggested to Iran was a beautiful box of chocolate, which was, however, totally empty. So that means that if you open the box of chocolate, there was nothing in it. So, and they had informally sent it to the Khatami administration in its waning days in June of 2005, and the Khatami administration had warned that if they submit this formally, it would be rejected right away, because it was basically an insult to Iranians, that in return for all of those concessions, they only made a vague promise that they would not attack Iran with nuclear weapons. Well, first of all, using nuclear weapon against any nation is illegal, according to everything that we know. And secondly, Iraq wasn't also attacked by nuclear weapon either. It was just invaded by conventional military force. So that wasn't basically anything that Iranian could use, particularly Iranian moderates, because Iranian hardliners, whether you believe it or not, it's not only Washington that has hawks and hardliners. Tehran also has hawks and hardliners. And just as Washington hawks don't want any agreement with Iran, Tehran's hawks also don't want any agreement with the United States. So it wasn't anything that moderates could present to the hardliners and say, see, these guys finally came around. Anyway, that was all. The failure of that negotiation was also a prime factor in the rise of a little-known guy named Mahmoud Ahmadinejad to Iranian presidency. On the eve of Iranian election of 2005, when the negotiation was faltering, President Bush said that Iranians should not vote because Iranian president doesn't have any power, and this is not a legitimate election. And that motivated a lot of Iranians to not only vote, but also vote for a hardliner like Ahmadinejad. But the same guy who was supposedly didn't have any power after he was elected, all of a sudden was transformed to a new Nazi leader or Hitler or whatever you want to call it, because he has started, using hot rhetoric against Israel, talking about Israel this or Israel that, which of course it was ill-conceived, but it was just hot rhetoric, okay? So Ahmadinejad administration came to power. They stopped implementing additional protocol because it hadn't been ratified. They didn't have any obligation. Then Iran's dossier from International Atomic Energy Agency was sent to United Nations Security Council, which was illegal, not because I say it, but because most experts say it. Then United Nations Security Council started issuing resolutions against Iran. And here is another point that I would like to emphasize. These resolutions that have been issued against Iran have been filed under Chapter 7 of United Nations Charter. And those of you who are not familiar, I should explain that when something is filed under Chapter 7, that means that all member states are obligated to carry out the provision of those resolutions. Now, Chapter 7 is devoted to threat to peace and international security. So in other words, Iran's nuclear program, that wasn't a threat to anyone, at least at that time or even now, was a threat to peace and security to the world, or was considered as such. Now, just to give you an example of the bias here, there are two main resolutions calling on Israel to withdraw its forces from occupied Palestinian land. One is 242, one is 338. One was issued in 1967, one was issued in 1973. Both of them were filed not under Chapter 7, but under Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is just a suggestion. You don't have any obligation to carry out. In other words, two wars that were the root cause of all the problems in the Middle East were not considered as threat to the international security, but a nuclear program in its infancy was considered a threat to international security and peace. So that goes to show the bias. And John Bolton, who was U.S. ambassador at that time, later was in a program on NPR. He was asked what was his most important accomplishment during his ambassadorship at the UN. And he said, my most important accomplishment was to file those resolutions in Security Council under Chapter 7 against Iran. So that, this just gives you a flavor of what's going on. All right, so this was 2005, 2009. Then in 2009, in June of 2009, Iran informed the IAEA that it was running out of fuel for Tehran Medical Research Reactor that, as I told you, U.S. had donated to Iran in 1967. Now, IAEA obligation is to provide the fuel for Iran, and Iran asked for it. But IAEA refused to do it. So Iran and IAEA and Western power reached an agreement in October of 2009 whereby Iran would exchange some of its enriched uranium in return for fuel for Tehran Medical Research Reactor. But both sides balked because the hardliners in Tehran wanted to exchange to take place in Tehran. The U.S. wanted to exchange to take place out of Iran. The hardliners wanted to exchange to take place in installments. The U.S. wanted to do it all at one time and other problems. So it didn't go anywhere. Iran then signed an agreement in May of 2010 with Turkey and Brazil, according to which Iran would actually implement the original agreement that had failed in 2009, which means that Iran had agreed to send its enriched uranium outside the country, but store it in Turkey. In return, it would receive fuel for Tehran Research Reactor, but the U.S. didn't go along with it. Okay, so Iran threatened that it would start enriching uranium for Tehran Medical Research Reactor, which is at a higher grade than the fuel that you need for example, Bushehr reactor. At that time, the idea was that Iran does not have the know-how and technology to do it. But one Iranian scientist called Dr. Majid Shahryari, who was a nuclear physicist, actually did the design, and Iran started to do enrichment at the higher level for Tehran Medical Research Reactor. And Majid Shahryari the next year was assassinated in Tehran and was killed by whoever killed him. So that, again, generated even more anxiety because the enriched uranium for Tehran Medical Research Reactor is at 19.75%, commonly rounded to 20%, but you may think that a small difference is insignificant, but it is significant, and I'll tell you why. Because anything that is enriched at 20% and higher is called highly enriched uranium, which means bomb, or it gives you the idea that this is bomb material. Anything below 20% is called low enriched uranium, which means fuel for reactor. So it is very significant to call it 19.75%, which is what it is, than 20%, which is what it is not. So that generated more anxiety. The U.S. started to impose tough economic sanctions, which, by the way, I should tell you that these economic sanctions are totally illegal because no country has the power to approve any law in its parliament and then apply that laws outside its borders, okay, which is what the United States is doing. In addition, if Iran's nuclear program has been taken to United Nations Security Council, and that is where the resolutions must be approved against Iran, the sanctions must also be approved by United Nations Security Council. But of course, this is a world where U.S. rules, U.S. does what it wants, but there are also countries that resisted it. So the economic sanctions was imposed. Then Obama administration came to office. They started negotiating, and they signed the agreement. And in Iran, we also had development. Hassan Rouhani, a moderate, was elected as president in June of 2013. Zarif, the old diplomat, became foreign minister. They started negotiating. They reached the Geneva interim accord in November of 2013, whereby Iran froze most of its nuclear program in its current state, and the negotiations are continuing today, and hopefully they will reach an agreement by June. That's basically a 15-20 minutes course on Iran's history of nuclear program. That's it.
Let's take a moment and pause and see if anyone has a question. Please do raise your questions or concerns. Yes?
I was wondering what you think the letter that Senator Tom Cotton, the President of Iran, will have on negotiations. Would it be a minimal effect or would it be devastating?
Well, I think the most beautiful response to the letter was given by Iran Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif. He said that these 47 senators don't know international laws. When the Obama administration or any other administration negotiates something with another country, it is not negotiating on behalf of its own political faction, let's say Democrats. It is negotiating on behalf of the United States and the United States government and its entire political establishment. So you cannot just go out and sign an international agreement and say, well, the next administration is Republican and we don't accept that, okay? If we were going to operate like that, then there would be no international agreement that would be accepted by practically anybody. The second thing that Zarif pointed out, and most of us may know, is that historically and constitutionally, foreign policy in the United States is the domain of the president. The president negotiates something, and if it is needed, then it will seek out the ratification by Senate if it does need ratification. Okay, but at the same time, this is an international agreement, and Zarif has suggested that after the agreement is signed, if it is signed, it will be taken to United Nations Security Council. It will be approved there under Chapter 7 again, because the original resolution against it were also in Chapter 7. Under Chapter 7, which means that its implementation and execution would be obligatory for all the signatories, including the United States. So I think that Tom Cotton, who is a freshman senator from Arkansas, who is a warmonger, he has talked about regime change in Iran. He is also a supporter of Mujahideen, the same group that made revelation about Iran's nuclear program, a terrorist organization. He doesn't know neither the United States Constitution, nor the United States tradition, nor international law. So this is, as Zarif said, is pure propaganda for hitting back at the president and trying to settle scores with the president. Nothing other than that.
We have time for one more question, perhaps? Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned, I wonder if you could expand a little bit on what you said, that the IAEA had an obligation to provide. I know that the Iranians ran out of fuel. They made a request for fuel, and that request was denied. You mentioned something that there was an IAEA requirement to provide that fuel. I was wondering, A, if you could expand on that, and B, if you know about or can expand on the role that the Israeli lobby played in blocking the Iranian request to receive fuel rights.
First of all, if any member of IAEA is making peaceful use of nuclear technology, the IAEA obligation is that to help that country, not only with technology needs, but all other aspects. This is
Signatory to the IAEA.
yes, if it is peaceful. So when Iran asks the IAEA to provide or supply with it, or help Iran to supply its medical nuclear reactor fuel, and IAEA refused, that was basically a violation of IAEA obligation. Secondly, I don't think I need to explain it that everything that happens in this country regarding Middle East goes through Israel lobby, goes through AIPAC, goes through all of that. So even if you don't hear anything about it, everything behind the scene is tied to it. Even the Obama administration that supposedly is at odds with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has kept consulting with Netanyahu government. And in fact, the administration criticized them a couple of weeks ago for revealing some of the secret details of the negotiations to the public, because Netanyahu tried to embarrass the administration by revealing and leaking those secret details. So that goes to show that despite all the hoopla and all the noise that they make, this administration, although it wants to reach an agreement with Iran, it is still in full consultation with Israel government and Israel political establishment. But I am happy that Netanyahu actually came to the Congress and gave this speech. I am one that supported it. In fact, I wrote an article and said, as a Muslim and Iranian American, I am delighted that he did that. You know why? Because it reveals once for all to the public the role that Israeli lobby has in this country, whereby they try to buy U.S. Congress in this country to advance their agenda. Their agenda is not necessarily aligned with national interest of this country. And I, as a taxpayer, am opposed to it. The other thing is that the speech at the Congress has transformed support for Israel, which was a bipartisan support, to a partisan issue where Republicans are arguing with Democrats and Democrats are arguing with Republicans. And that, for people like me, it delights me to see that, okay? Remember, 10 years ago, John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt tried to publish their article about Israel lobby, called Israel Lobby, an article that had been commissioned by The Atlantic, and after they wrote it, The Atlantic refused to publish it, and they had to go outside the United States, London Review of Books, to publish it there, and then later their book. Remember, this is the same country that when Jimmy Carter, our former president, the architect of Camp David Agreement, the only peace agreement between Israel and Arab nation, okay, published his book, Palestine, Peace Not Apartheid. He was ostracized. Nobody talks to him. And the President Carter recently said that President Obama has never consulted with him regarding anything out of fear of Israeli lobby. This is the same country. Now, anything that helps to reveal the extent of this undue, harmful influence that this lobby has in this country is a plus for this country. Slowly but surely, people of this country are opening their eyes to see the role that this lobby has in this country. Now, the same people who fund these activities, like Sheldon Adelson, are the same people who are funding Netanyahu campaign for re-election in Israel's election next year. So first of all, they have mixed Israeli elections with U.S. political system and political establishment. Secondly, they are trying to buy both elections, both here in the United States and Israel. In my view, the saddest and the most depressing aspect of Netanyahu's speech in the Congress was the fact that each time he made a warmongering statement, he was applauded and with a standing ovation. And in fact, they measured it out of the 45 minutes that he spent, 25 minutes of it was spent for applauding and standing ovations. So the speech was only 20 minutes long, okay? So this is a sad testimony to what has happened to democracy in this country, that a few billionaires and a lobby can actually buy a Congress. People just go out of their way to shake the hands of a man that wants to start another war in the Middle East. And he doesn't want to fight this war himself. Netanyahu doesn't want to fight this war himself. He wants the United States to fight this war for him. He wants the United States soldiers' blood to be spilled. He wants the United States resources to be spent for this. He wants the United States get all the hostile reactions from the people of that area against the United States, not Israel. So this is the extent that this lobby, the harmful influence of this lobby in this country. Now, people like me, I'm in my 60s now, so I can no longer pretend that I'm young, okay? But young people in this country should open their eyes, because if we don't do anything, if young people don't do anything, in 20 years we don't have anything like resembling, okay, even vaguely, a democratic tradition in this country, and that's a danger for this country and a danger for the rest of the world.
I couldn't agree more. I was wondering though if you do let the because the Iranian request for fuel didn't come to the U.S. I think it was Brazil you mentioned.
Yes.
Right. Do you know how the lobby worked its magic that they got the Brazilians to say no, or do you not have it?
I don't think Brazilians ever said no per person.
I'm just assuming.
Yes.
I'm assuming that the lobby was behind, that kind of the global lobby was behind the decision of denying the request.
Okay, basically what the Israelis have done is they have set the bar so high that it's impossible to achieve it, and therefore there would be no resolution of this other than war. Netanyahu wants Iran to become a utopian state, okay? But there is no utopian state. Netanyahu talks about a violation of human rights of Iranian people. Oh yes, there is gross violation of human rights of Iranian people going on in Iran every single day. No doubt about it. But Netanyahu is not qualified to talk about it. If he's concerned about human rights, he should first address human rights of Palestinians, okay? And this country, okay, the beacon of democracy, has its own human rights problems, okay? From Ferguson to California to Maryland to wherever you want. So basically what they want is Iran to become a utopian state before they sign any agreement. And because that's not going to happen, okay, because it's impossible to happen, that means that the sanctions and military threats against Iran should continue until Iran either say uncle and give up its nuclear program, the way Muammar Gaddafi did in Libya, which, by the way, didn't guarantee his survival. He was killed eventually. Or they start a war, okay? So that the bar is so high, and only for Iran. Netanyahu talks about saying the marriage of nuclear program, marriage of nuclear weapon and Islamic radicals is very dangerous for the world. I totally agree, okay? But that marriage has already happened, okay? That marriage has already happened, except that we don't talk about it. Why? Because those Islamic radicals that have nuclear weapons are allied of the United States and have political relationship with Israel. Those radical Islamists are in Pakistan, okay? These are the guys who helped create Mujahideen in Afghanistan, who helped Taliban, who gave heaven to Osama bin Laden to live there for 10 years before he was killed. These are the guys whose military and intelligence services is populated by radicals. These are the ones who have been killing Shiites in Pakistan for years in a low-intensity war. And these are the guys that the Bush administration threatened to bomb to medieval ages if they don't go along with what the United States wants. So that marriage has already happened, except that the marriage is inconvenient to talk about. So let's talk about another marriage, okay? And Iran, there is no evidence that Iran has nuclear weapon. There is no evidence that Iran is trying to make nuclear weapon. And national intelligence estimate of 2007, reconfirmed in 2010, 2011, and 2012, said that Iran has stopped its nuclear program. I would add one more point and then stop. According to national intelligence estimate, Iran had a research program for making nuclear weapon, but it stopped it in 2003. I haven't seen any evidence that actually shows that. But let's say that it's true. Let's say that Iran had a nuclear research program for making weapon, but it stopped it in 2003. The question is, why 2003, and what happened in 2003 that induced Iran to stop it? The most important thing that is relevant to Iran that happened in 2003 was invasion of Iraq. So if Iranians were trying to make nuclear weapon out of the fear of the United States attacking them, then invasion of Iraq and overthrowing Saddam Hussein regime so easily should have motivated them to speed up their program to much higher level so that they could get at least their hands on a crude nuclear weapon as a deterrent. But the opposite happened. Why? Because if Iran did have a research program to make nuclear weapon, it was as a deterrent against Saddam Hussein regime. Because Saddam Hussein was known to have the know-how, it had gotten very close to make a nuclear weapon, but because the regime was overthrown, and not only it was overthrown, Iran allies came to power, the Shiites came to power, there was no reason for that program to continue. So even if we assume that that program existed, there was no justification whatsoever to continue it, and that's why Iran stopped it when it stopped it, which was in 2003.
Well, thank you very much for this history. Thank you. I hand you over to Dr. Meshkati to give us insight into some of the details, some of the security and safety issues in the Middle East. Please.
Thank you very much, Ani. I want really to thank you and the Middle East Center and your colleague, Dr. Najmedin, for inviting us here. I just want to say something about Professor Sahimi. This gentleman, not only that he's my friend, he's really the walking directory of Iran nuclear program. He is the most factual, the most well-informed person that I've ever met in my life with respect to this. And he has...
You haven't met too many people in your life.
Monograph, 7 parts
yes.
on the Iran nuclear program that covers this, and as you see that he has everything in the memory. And I would highly encourage you to, if you are interested in the Iranian nuclear program, from its inception to last week, look at his 7 parts monograph. It's really I don't see anything comparable to Muhammad Sahimi's 7-piece on Iranian nuclear program, its history, and all these areas that he mentioned. I want to recognize our Professor Phil Sibb and Professor my very good Nazarian from business school and from public diplomacy. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. What I would like to talk today with you, again, Mohammed did a fantastic job on looking at the history of Iranian nuclear program. I want to provide you with some of my personal reflection. That's why I put that personal reflection. And I think it's, as Carl Gustav Jung has a book on this concept, he calls that synchronicity. Synchronicity, Carl Gustav Jung defines that as meaningful coincidences. I think this sheer fact that I'm here standing before you on a day which is March 11, 2015, I think there is an element of synchronicity and meaningful coincidences in that. Not only about the Iranian nuclear area, which I've been a student in that field. Today, ladies and gentlemen, is the 4th anniversary of the Fukushima accident, as you may remember. And this was one of the biggest disasters in the face of humanity. The mess which is going on in Fukushima is going to continue for many, many more years. I would like to acknowledge the fact all the people that who died because of the tsunami and all the people that they became homeless because of the Fukushima Daiichi meltdown and the exclusion zone around that. And please remind you that we are dealing with a very, very, very serious technology. And any irresponsible comment about this technology and the countries that they are possessing that and the countries that they are operating this technology, any irresponsible comment should be really taken very seriously by all of us. Because the result of a nuclear accident is unconscionable. And I would like to start with this note and acknowledge the accident at Fukushima. I will talk a little bit about that. As Hani said, I was part of I had the honor of the part of the committee that produced this report. That was the National Academy of Sciences committee that we investigated the Fukushima accident and looking for its lessons learned for U.S. nuclear power plant and overhead. This is something that needs to be reckoned with, and we cannot forget about that. As I mentioned to you, I would like to share with you some reflection in this area because I consider myself a student in this field. I'm glad that my friend Mohammed talked about the year 1995. In my judgment, year 1995 was a milestone. That was when Iran was able finally to convince Russia to help it with building a Bushehr, and unfortunately President Clinton came with that executive order to basically kill the deal. And they tried to constantly kill that, finishing the Bushehr nuclear power plant. I sent a letter to editor in May 7, 1995, and the title at that time was Isolating Iran with Endangered World Health. I basically at that time raised the problem that we are dealing with a very important technology. Let's to have international collaboration with Iran. Don't isolate Iran when it comes to the peaceful nuclear technology. Unfortunately, that's the error that President Clinton made, and it continued during President George W. Bush, even worse, and then first Obama administration. This issue of isolation of Iran, I think, was crazy, is crazy, and will be even crazier. And more than that, the irresponsible comment of some pundits that comes with this isolation. And again, there is no better day than today, on the 4th anniversary of Fukushima, that we look at the nexus of these two topics, nuclear program of Iran and the issue of nuclear safety, and its implication for the region. I would like to show you something. This is basically a typical animation of a nuclear power plant, which is the pressurized water reactor. We have another type of reactor, the one that exploded in Fukushima. It's called boiling water reactor, but that basically doesn't have the secondary loop. It's one loop. Basically what it is that we have the reactor core that generates heat. We have the primary loop that absorbs the heat from the core, and then it goes to the heat exchanger and steam generator. We have a secondary loop. The steam gets generated over here, comes and runs the turbine. The turbine is attached to the generator and makes the power that left the city. This is from Nuclear Regulatory Commission. You can see the animation. What is important here is two things, particularly in the context of today, that I would like you to remember. One of them is this issue of the containment building that is basically contains the nuclear fuel, nuclear reactor, and the steam generator, and then the issue of these two loops over here. Again, in the case of a boiling water reactor, we don't have the secondary loop. This first loop comes here to the steam generator and makes that. That's one of the biggest differences. But the reason that I'm sharing that with you is having this continuous circulation is very, very important for us in order to cool the reactor. One of the biggest problems that could happen in a nuclear power plant that happened in Fukushima is we lost circulation because of I will talk about that, earthquake and tsunami. However, there is another thing that you ought to remember which is not under the containment dome, and that's a spent fuel pool. That's where they hold the used fuel. That's the one that is stored outside that. And that was again another problem in Fukushima. I want you to keep it in the back of your mind that one of the reasons that Chernobyl became a mess that exploded in April 26, 1996, was they didn't have this containment dome. The containment dome is a 4 feet thick reinforced concrete. When you drive to San Diego at San Onofre, you see that the two huge dome on your right-hand side. That's very important. I will come back to it again in the context of Iran. By the way, Sahimi mentioned that Iran built the nuclear reactor, and unfortunately this containment dome, which was semi-finished, was bombed by Iraqi airplanes in the case of Bushehr. Iran had one under construction nuclear power plant. And that was again another one of the genocide of Saddam Hussein, that he did, bombing a containment dome on the nuclear power plant. Of course, he killed his own people in the Kurdish region, but that was totally unnecessary. But what is going on here, and I would like to share with you, this is something I owe it to my doctoral student, Nalda Pasha, asked her to put for me. And I would like you to look at the Persian Gulf area. and see what's going on over there. And put that in the context of Iran nuclear negotiation and isolation of Iran. And here, what I would like you to see. In the case of Persian Gulf, we have, this is the city of Bushehr. Iran has one operating nuclear power plant, Bushehr, which are on the grid, and then 2 or 3 more planned, and they signed the contracts, Mohammed, right, to build 2 more with Russia like 2 months ago. This is what's going to be in the case of Iran. One operating, this is the only operating nuclear plant in the Persian Gulf area. And these 2 are planned. The groundbreaking for these will happen next year. Then we have Abu Dhabi, Baraka 1 and Baraka 2. They are under construction. They are going to go in operation in 3 years and in 4 years. By year 2020, we have 2 operating nuclear power plants, Baraka 1 and Baraka 2 in Abu Dhabi. The technology of that is from South Korea. KEPCO, Korean Power Electric Company, they are making that. But there are 2 more Barakas which is on their plan, and the groundbreaking for that has been done. We have 4 over there. Saudi Arabia has announced that they want to make up to 16 nuclear power plants. I asked Yalda to put only 8 of them here, because hopefully the other 8 will be on the other coast, on the Red Sea. I don't know, maybe they want to put all the 16 here. And it's not just phony ambition, because most of our southern neighbors, they have desalination plants that they use the Persian Gulf water for drinking water. And both Chinese and Japanese and Koreans, these 3 countries that are reactor vendors, they have a very attractive combined plant, that there is a nuclear plant attached to a desalination plant. That's why this is becoming very important. Then, if the story is not finished, Kuwait has also said that they are going to have up to 4 nuclear plants. Basically, this scenario, maybe Saudi, instead of 16 or 8 over here, they are going to have less. But this is reality. This 2 is reality. This 1 is reality. These 2 are going to go on grid in 3-4 years. What we are seeing that in this small body of water, we will have up to 19 nuclear power plants in the next 20 years. 19 nuclear power plants. And remember that these countries, they may have their drinking water also coming. Right now, they get a sizable portion of their drinking water from desalinating Persian Gulf water. But over there, that will be more. Again, I'm not sure where Saudi Arabia is going to put that, but I just asked Yalda Khashoggi give me only 8 plants.
Are these light water reactors? Or
Yes.
they're
They're all like a BW, pressurized water reactor. But they could have some of the advanced design of Arriva. It depends if the French can lobby more. French lobbied very hard. Mr. Sarkozy himself went to UAE to lobby Abu Dhabi for that, but the US lobby was a little bit stronger. That's why the contract went to the lady Atomic, and she was the head of Arriva at that time. She lost the battle to the Korean because, of course, US. And one of the things about Saudi Arabia, about Abu Dhabi, that Mohammed knows more about that, is an agreement called 123 that US signed with them.
Are they going to run their own fuel cycles, do you know?
123 says no fuel cycle.
Okay.
That's one of the things. It's basically it's a bilateral agreement between United States and United Arab Emirates that they signed that they can't have nuclear fuel cycle.
So we're supplying the fuel. The U.S. is supplying the fuel for them, or
Korean.
Korea is.
The good term, since we are on the record, I need to watch my language
Right.
and be politically correct. The term for this plant is called they are transplanted. They're literally taken from South Korea with their operating personnel, with everything, and transplanted here. Because UAE doesn't have the infrastructure, neither manpower nor infrastructure, for many years. The regulatory people from FNAC, they are hiring all retired people from United States NRC and Health Safety Executive, Her Majesty Health Safety Executive of United Kingdom. Her Majesty's subjects are running their regulatory thing for Her Majesty. Don't forget that. They're subject of Her Majesty. But this is what is going on in the Persian Gulf. And again, I would like you to please pay attention that we are talking in the context of three very well-known nuclear accidents: 3 Mile Island in the United States in 1979, Chernobyl in Ukraine in 1986, and Fukushima in Japan in 2011. We have all these reactors, and there is no, that is one of the biggest worries, but there is no international mechanism for coordination of the safety and the design and emergency response for this. IAEA, as Dr. Sahimi said, and I've done some testimonies on that, they are primarily concerned with the safeguard. Their technical assistance program is subject to political pressure at the stroke of a pen that they can cut you off from. And again, I just want to put this in front of you to see the dire situation that we are talking about, or we are facing it in Persian Gulf in the next 20 years, and nobody gives a damn to it in the Congress, in AIPAC, in Israel, or whatever. This is the reality. Even if they remove the uranium enrichment from Iran, go to the maximalist view, this is the reality that we are facing in the Persian Gulf in 20 years. And that, I think, being honest with you, I think this is much more important than this hype about Iran's level of enrichment and the size of the enrichment. This is much more serious, riskier issue than the hype that is made by some pundits and by these people that they make irresponsible things. This is a statement by Iranian Foreign Minister, Professor Sahimi mentioned his name, Dr. Mohammad Javad Zarif, in an op-ed that he wrote for a newspaper called Al-Sharq al-Wasat. This is about Persian Gulf, and I think this statement captures really what we are facing over there. He said this is really an interconnected body of water that we are living there, and our livelihood is depending on that. And that's why I think what we are facing in Persian Gulf should be the reason for more collaboration and cooperation on this regional approach to nuclear safety. And if we don't do that, I think God knows what's going to happen in the Persian Gulf in the near future. I have this quote. I've written an article for, which is on the Huffington Post called Atom for Peace in the Persian Gulf, and this quote and this data and that are on that. If you go Google Meshkati Huffington Post Atom for Peace, you see that, and there is a hyperlink and that to that. I gave an interview almost like how many years, like 15 years, 12 years ago, to Guardian, and at that time we said we should not be worried about Iran's nuclear enrichment program because that's not an issue. And then there is a problem of the issue of the secrecy. In my life, I learned that secrecy is the biggest enemy to nuclear safety. And unfortunately, this thing is going on in the Persian Gulf among our Arab neighbors and others. And the secrecy was one of the main reasons for the accident of 3 Mile Island, was the Chernobyl and Fukushima. And this is another thing that, unfortunately, the politicization, the villainization of Iran or other countries is causing in that. That's what the reason that I show this to you is I tell you that I've been, sometimes I think myself as a Don Quixote, that I'm basically fighting this enemy, or maybe I'm carrying a Cassandra curse. I tell the truth, but nobody believes me. Maybe I'm really having this Cassandra curse. But I said all of this before Fukushima. And then let's look at Fukushima accident. This is the map of Japan. This is the epicenter of that. This is the city of Tokyo. And there were 2 reactors. One of them is Fukushima Daiichi. As you see, Daiichi is close to the epicenter, and Fukushima Daini, which is closer to Tokyo. That was what you have heard, right? That this accident happened. And then, of course, Daini, which was close to the Tokyo, was spared, and Daiichi had meltdown, and there is explosions and everything. Is that the only 2 nuclear plants that you have heard about on that coast? Have you heard about another nuclear plant called Onagawa? These guys, they have heard that because they are my friends and they come to my office. But I asked this question last April at the meeting at the International Atomic Energy Agency. 200 people were in the nice room. It was a conference on nuclear safety. I asked them that they were coming from nuclear regulators and that from all over the world. How many of you have heard about another nuclear plant? And all of you are very smart, much smarter than me, because you are USC students or professors. Search the web, read the news. How many of you have heard about another nuclear plant called Onagawa? That was even closer to the epicenter. That even the tsunami wave was 1 meter higher than Daiichi over there. Why haven't you heard about it? If it was the tsunami and earthquake that destroyed Daiichi, why Onagawa was spared? If it were, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, I can show you the PowerPoint, but I don't have time. Honey is going to kill me if I go over time. But I have it. I can show it to you. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency report, that nuclear plant experienced the highest earthquake shock in the recorded history of any nuclear plant in the world. But you haven't heard about it. And the tsunami wave was 1 meter high. If you want to know about that, read my former student term paper, which was published in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists at Japan Times. I can tell you a little bit more. But the whole thing boils down to the preparation of the nuclear utility that owned Onagawa, which is called Tohoku, as opposed to the nuclear utility that owned these 2 poor reactors that's called TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company. The safety culture, risk perception, risk management, preparation that went into Onagawa was totally different from these 2. That's why when the tsunami happened, that was it. And then we turn back to Persian Gulf. I've reviewed some material coming from Abu Dhabi about Baraka 1, Baraka 2. Their official estimation of tsunami, they are in total denial. They say once in 100 million years there wouldn't be a tsunami over there. I was talking to our friend Kostas Sirilakis, who is an expert in tsunami, renowned expert. He said there are writings from Alexander the Great time that one of his commanders, he faced a tsunami when they were going to Iran in the Persian Gulf. It hasn't been 100 million years ago. You remember that. You and Jannati would remember that, right? But that's unfortunately the situation. Anyway, I just want to share with you this problem that in the case of the earthquake, unfortunately the earthquake happened. We lost the offside power. The offside power is the one that runs that secondary loop. Of course, we have the emergency diesel generators, they kick in, but unfortunately everything was okay. The emergency diesel generator kicked in, we had a circulation, but after 45 minutes tsunami came and they got inundated. And that's why we lost the cooling. The rest is history. We lost cooling for the reactor, and we lost the cooling for a spent fuel pool, because the spent fuel pool is still hot, they need to be cooled. And that's why we have the mess over there. And in the case of Dairi, the operators, with some heroic acts, they were able to save the Daini from meltdown. And remember, Daini is closer to Tokyo. Had they not been able to save the plant, because it was closer to Tokyo and it had a radiation release, you had to evacuate Tokyo. That would be a disaster. That's why I say that nuclear plant operators are the first and last layer of defense for the society. And it's not only their action that takes over there, all the conditioning, all the resources that they get beforehand. And that's why the role of the nuclear utility and the regulator comes into existence. And the regulators, we are subjects of Her Majesty in one of those countries. And the issue of the regulators is very important, their oversight and their independence on the safety of nuclear plant. I throw a lot over here, but to show it to you, because I didn't know the audience what you are interested, but somebody asked me last year about the cost of Fukushima Daiichi and Daini accident. This is from Physician for Social Responsibility. That's one of the credible cost estimates. $250 to $500 billion. That doesn't, by the way, take into account all the site restoration money that you have to do and all the continuous water leak. Continuous leak that Fukushima Daiichi has to the ocean. Think about a Fukushima Daiichi type of a leak in the Persian Gulf. And everybody, by the way, they were saying, oh, Fukushima accident was unthinkable. Nonsense. Nonsense. And it happened. The committee was created. Again, this is your truly, in Fukushima Daiichi, we had to put the Tyvek because of the high radiation effect. And just imagine, I had this glass on for 6 hours under the mask. And it was coming down to here, and I couldn't put it up over there. Just imagine, this is the condition that the workers, they have to work 8 to 10 hours a day in that plant and be subject to radiation. You have to put 2 layers of Tyvek, tape the hand, tape the boots, and that. And this is what the condition of the workers that they work over there. My advice after coming back from this trip was one way to prevent this nuclear accident is to take the nuclear utility executive and the politician and their family, take them over there and ask them to live 1 week in that condition. Then they understand and appreciate what this poor soul has been preaching for the last 25, 30 years about the importance of nuclear safety. Was it a natural disaster or a man-made anthropogenic accident? There was a report that came out from Carnegie on the first anniversary of this accident, why Fukushima was preventable. And trust me, it was preventable, as the case of Onagawa shows. And we try to address some of that again. If I had a little contribution to this was writing the sections. It's a pretty technical report about the parts about the Onagawa and that I wrote about that. But this is, by the way, former MIT professor who became the commissioner of NRC said that, as you see, he minces a lot of words. The accident was not of extremely low probability, it was not unthinkable or unforeseen, meaning that it was predictable and we could do that. I want to fast forward to some other slides that I have here, which I think it fits better with what Sahimi told us, which is a fantastic presentation. This is, by the way, about Onagawa I want to share with you. This is Onagawa nuclear plant, closer to epicenter. And in the case of Onagawa, this is Irene Wu's paper that I can show it to you, but this is her, a Japanese American that did a beautiful paper. This is a paper which was published in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. You can find it yourself. Onagawa, the Japanese nuclear plant that didn't melt down on 3/11. And one of the reasons, this is again a version of that was published in the Japan Times, which is this one. This big one. It says over here is all good. But the one thing which is very important to know is Onagawa was 60 kilometers closer than Daiichi to the epicenter. The tsunami was 1 meter higher over there. But these are some statements from International Atomic Energy Agency that it received the strongest thing, but it was remarkably undamaged. And we have tried to analyze that in our research and try to address that why, and it again, trust me, boils down to the safety culture of the utility, their preparation. There were two different utilities under the same regulatory mechanism and regime. Don't forget that, please. They were both in Japan. The regulator was MITI, Minister of Economy and International Trade, or Trade and Industry and International Trade. The regulator was the same. Basically, if you do that, the utility manager. This is the city of Onagawa, by the way, before the accident. This is before the tsunami and after the tsunami. I just want to leave this thought with you on this anniversary of Fukushima, that we could prevent and we could have prevented with Fukushima had we taken into account proactive risk management approaches. And this is what I'm trying to preach for in the case of Iran. Let me, so somebody asked about the gentleman over there, about technical assistance. I would like to show you something about NPT, because Sahimi explained that beautifully. And NPT was signed in 1968. It was Senate ratified that in 1969, and then it was went into effect in 1970. And that this is the Article 4, which is the whole essence behind justification for Iran nuclear activity. This is a quote from Article 4. That basically said that every country that is a signatory to this, they are entitled to do this, a complete nuclear fuel cycle, and the keyword over this is inalienable rights. And just for the record, Pakistan, India, Israel are not signatory to NPT. Repeat again, Pakistan, India, Israel, right? They are not signatory to NPT. No comment on it. Then there is Article 6 of NPT, says that the countries that they possess nuclear weapon, they pass the nuclear threshold, they need to work toward disarmament. Article 6, enshrined in NPT. Let's look where we are now. I wrote an article with a friend in year 2000. We said NPT is a Cold War relic. The new world order demands a different international nuclear weapons control regime. And why we say NPT is a Cold War relic? Look at these problems that was with Article 6. There was a total disregard and violation of Article 6 since 1970 by United States. I cited my references over there. Israel nuclear development, US had a blind eye in that under Article 6. India and Pakistan, they detonated their bomb in May of 1998, one after each other. Of course, they were not part of NPT. They were outside of NPT. US and India, they signed a nuclear deal, even though India was not a participant of the NPT. And then, again, under Article 6, there were a lot of discussion of the disarmament, but in violation of that, US thought about developing a new type of a warhead that they call that reliable replacement warhead, and some people in the field, they were calling RRW ridiculous redundant warhead, because they say US doesn't need that. And then there is also, in NPT, there is no word on nuclear safety. As if, of course it happened, it was signed before Chernobyl, but in light of Chernobyl and Fukushima, I think that needs to be read. And then there is no provision for nuclear waste issues. Over there, no provision for nuclear security issues, loose nukes. And then there is also a bigger problem that I have been on this topic, I've written about that and that IAEA has a serious structural problem, in my humble judgment, when it comes to this nuclear safety and nuclear technical assistance versus safeguard. It's like that you have a body that one arm is so big, it takes 68% of the budget, and this arm is weak, so weak, and it takes only 3% of the budget. That's where IAEA is. And I think that's another reason that I'm more worried for Persian Gulf, because this agency doesn't have jurisdiction, doesn't have the capabilities to oversee that. And then there is a problem of, you ask about technical assistance, Iran and Article 4. As a signatory to NPT, Iran is entitled to receive technical assistance from IAEA. It was. However, several years ago, we wrote an article with NPT. With one of my honor is I was co-author to the man who was one of the negotiators of NPT. He was on the board of governors. He was the founding father of Iran Atomic Energy Organization, Dr. Akbar Etemad. And Etemad says additional protocol, and that violates the letter and spirit of the NPT, because he considers that the NPT is a very delicate balance between right to have the nuclear fuel cycle and the inspection. This is the Etemad, who is an internationally renowned person and considers additional protocol and that a violation of that. But however, what is very important over here, going back to the case of Iran, this is from IAEA report about technical assistance with Iran that they have. If you look, some of these technical assistance, the program was very long, but the actual project was very small, and that was prior to 2006 or 7. This is the nuclear and radiation and security part of it, and as you see over here, the key says that these are basically the plant, and these are the actually done, which is very small. This is actually done. But the most interesting thing over here, for example, I want to show it to you, is a report by the International Atomic Energy Agency on February 9, 2007, that in this report, we wrote about that, and I criticized that. In this report, they say that the United States House of Representatives basically, they decided to cut down $1.5 million from U.S. contribution to the technical assistance to Iran for nuclear safety. This is unconscionable. U.S. forced IAEA to cut the technical assistance to Iran. That Lee Hamilton, who was at that time the ranking Democrat in the House Committee on International Relations, said this bill is not going to stop, it's going to slow Iran's radiation. But this money was for technical assistance. That is really crazy. That is really crazy. I think I'm approaching the end of the time. I have this thing which I call that IAEA dual personality. Muhammad al-Baradei and IAEA, they received the Nobel Prize. However, on one end they promote nuclear safety, on another end they are basically subject to this political pressure by US, cut down the technical assistance. That's why I call that IAEA personality or dual personality. And to me, this is the nuclear, this is the Nobel Prize, and the citation of the Nobel Prize says for the promotion of nuclear safety in the world. And then they have this thing against Iran. If you read really the citation of the Nobel Prize, which I have it here and I don't have time to show it to you. However, I want to go back to the case of Iran. I see that I'm approaching. Honey, how much time do I have?
Yeah, we
No?
are.
I just want to show you one thing about this irresponsible comments that I mentioned. And I think because today we are talking about nuclear safety, I just want to share you this. This report came out a few years ago. Sahimi knows about that very well. You remember the one that they said an Azeri background on that. This is written by these two gentlemen, Henry Skolowski and Patrick Clausen. These are these two gentlemen. The report came out like 8 years ago. Mr. Sokolowski and Dr. Patrick Clausen. By the way, this gentleman has a PA in political science from USC. They had several statements in this, and they basically said, I want to show you this. This is very important. This is what they said in that report, and they propose in that report. Under the option to prevent Iran from getting nuclear technology, introduction of fatal design flaws in critical reactor centrifuges of weapon components during the production to ensure catastrophic failure during the use. This is what the people that who advised multiple administrations, they said, how to stop Iran. Introduction of fatal design flaw. And then they say this, if we do this, it will look like an industrial accident. And then this gentleman, Dr. Patrick Clausen, that I just Googled him, he has given more than 20 testimonies to US Congress. Just Google him, you see that. This is in his bio. This gentleman that was given 20 statements, he made this statement in a meeting that I was there. If you can watch it in the C-SPAN. He said, yes, indeed, delightful to ensure that Bushehr having a similar accident like the one at 3 Mile Island. These are the type of personalities that they give testimonies to US Congress. It would be indeed delightful to have an accident like this. I think this is a sad state of affairs. Sahimi here, myself here, and 10 other people like us, our writings would not be even seen by the janitor of the US Congress, let alone. Yours would be read by the senators, mine not by the janitors. And this gentleman with this mindset goes and gives 20 testimony. Last one was a few months ago. And this is, I think, part of the tragedy and sad commentary. And that's why we are here. That's why we had that circus last week in the Congress. Thank you very much.
We still have a couple of minutes. If you guys have any questions to ask, this would be the time. I have one general question to ask. Are you guys optimistic about the nuclear negotiations or nuclear safety issues in the Middle East and in Iran in general?
Well,
safety, younger colleagues.
Safety, Professor Meshkati knows, so I won't make any comment. But regarding the political negotiations, I'm very hopeful that they can. Yes.
I agree with Mohammed. Maybe it's my euphemism or my youth that I'm very hopeful for the negotiation. But for nuclear safety, I am very pessimistic. Extremely pessimistic. I think the negotiation will resolve one way or another to a good ending, but nuclear safety is going to go down the tube.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for being here.